Hi everyone, and welcome to this video on how to master a nerve-wracking presentation. During the video I'm going to run through 5 tools or tips that I think will help you to feel more confident about your presentation and to communicate more effectively. The first one is checking the brief, and this relates to recognizing what content you need to cover in your presentation. The second one, what should I do with my body? How should you hold or position yourself when you're speaking to an audience? Thirdly, how should I use my voice? This relates to speaking up, essentially, in order to be persuasive and effective. Fourthly, do I need to practice? The answer to that is going to be yes. And I hope to kind of dispel the myth that, too much practice is a bad thing, or that practice makes you seem robotic in some way. And then finally, how can I control my nerves? I have some really good research-based tips here, and I think it sort of relates to the other 4 tools as well. I should start off by saying it's very normal to be a bit scared or anxious before you do your first presentation, especially your first presentation. But having said that, it might be your 100th presentation and you're still feeling nervous. So most people get scared about public speaking, and there's even a famous Mark Twain quote: "There are 2 types of speakers in the world, the nervous and the liars." My own first experience of public speaking was a college presentation on the topic of torture and captivity. I know, it's a heavy topic. This was during my final year of a BA in psychology. The topic itself was actually fascinating to me, and I spent a disproportionately large amount of time researching theory, case studies, meta-analyses, experimental interventions, and all sorts of other literature around this topic. It was an assignment I undertook with enthusiasm, and I can still remember much of the content and conclusions I arrived at during my presentation and the essay that went with it. I was actually working as part of a group on this assignment, and we all addressed different aspects of torture and captivity. I don't remember what mark we got, but I do remember feeling acutely aware as I was presenting that I was not measuring up to 2 of the lecturer's criteria: A, do not go over time, and B, look at your audience. I actually found it too daunting to look at anyone in the room. So, I also made the mistake of trying to pack in far too much material. And I was kind of clumsy physically in using the apparatus. This was pre-PowerPoint, just barely pre-PowerPoint days. So at that time we were using acetates on a projector, so you would need to change the slides manually every time. There's a few reasons that maybe I found this a very difficult experience. Fear of the unknown. It was my first formal presentation. Lack of appropriate practice. I did not practice at all. A sense that everyone was paying keen attention to every word I uttered, and a belief that they all knew how horribly anxious I was. Since then, I've gained a fair bit of experience through lecturing and presenting at conferences and workshops and so on. I can say that whilst it gets much easier with experience, sometimes it's still nerve-wracking to speak to an audience. And I also sometimes still feel like I've had a bad day at the office. But I know now that I can ease my nerves with some principles of preparation that help my delivery. So the suggestions to follow, they stem from my own experience of what works for me, but also from consulting others who know better than me what makes a good presentation. So tip 1, check the brief. If you're presenting for a class assignment, at a conference, or making a speech, start out with a clear brief. If it's a class assessment, there will pretty much always be a brief to tell you A, how long you can speak for, B, what content you should cover, and C, how you will be marked. I was at a conference a few years ago, and I was sitting in the audience, and I was kind of eagerly awaiting one particular speaker who was a bit of a pioneer in my field and very experienced. Now, we all knew we had 20 minutes to speak with additional time for questions, but when this speaker got up, she began by saying that she hadn't had time to prepare and she'd fly through her material. And that's exactly what she did. She flew through lots and lots of material. The lack of preparation was apparent and a bit disappointing, and the presentation overall just wasn't as interesting or as engaging as I'd hoped. So when you're about to present or speak, keep in mind that there might be someone listening who's really looking forward to your topic and wants to hear what you have to say. Anyone speaking to a group should be ready to deliver the full content in an unhurried fashion. Students are really nervous usually about presenting, and they actually scoff at the recommendation that they should not go over time. I find that they seem to figure that they have no intention of staying up there a second longer than required, but that's not my experience. I found out pretty quickly that I needed to pull students up when they were 30 seconds to a minute over time, or there would be a very large cumulative effect when all the students in the class went over time. So, important rule, stick to time. This requires adequate preparation. More on that to follow. In line with your brief, you should have a clear idea of the content you need to cover, and this should be well organized so that it's communicated coherently. For assignments, there may be some scope to place more emphasis on one aspect of the topic or another. So if it's a lecturer's assignment, they might give you some freedom. In other cases, you need to evenly address all points on the brief. But the main thing is you should meet all criteria required. Don't neglect anything that you're expected to talk about. For instance, if you've conducted research and you present your study by setting out the background, methods and results, but fail to offer any conclusions, the story is unfinished or patchy. Your presentation should be like a story. Have a beginning, a middle and an end, and structure it clearly so that you walk your audience through the story like you're holding their hand. Be clear ahead of time what your argument or collection of points is, and then communicate that argument as clearly as you can. Okay, second point, what do I do with my body? Well, what do people do when they're nervously standing at the top of a room with a group of people waiting for them to speak? What are the telltale signs of nerves? We can all relate to this. Maybe shaking, sweating, fidgeting, constantly clicking a pen or playing with a marker in their hands. Some people avoid standing in front of the audience and they'll sit behind a computer and away from the projector screen so you can hardly see them. This is like hiding behind your slides. For someone feeling self-conscious, it's kind of reasonable. We can understand why they might do that. But unfortunately, if you want to be a persuasive presenter, you need to put on a performance. This means you need to put yourself out there. What is important is to plan for and practice the body language you want to adopt. For instance, you can plan to A, adopt an open stance. Rather than folding your arms across your chest, keep your arms more open. B, avoid gripping a lectern or table and move your hands without fidgeting, if possible. Rather than clicking a pen or nervously rubbing the back of your neck, use your hands in a way that opens you up and maybe even makes you a bigger physical presence. This does not mean frantically waving your arms about. Instead, think of something gentle like opening the palms of your hands to your audience in an almost welcoming gesture, rather than keeping your arms pinned by your sides. When you look composed and quietly confident, it allows your audience to relax. And C, raise your eye level to look at the whole room. Avoid keeping your gaze inwards and downwards. Make eye contact with audience members, and this helps to engage them in the story you're telling. If you really feel you can't do this, then scan the room and even look beyond the back row of the audience so that you're not alienating the audience by only looking at your shoes or the computer notes in front of you. That's where I went wrong in my first ever presentation. Okay, how to use your voice. Speak up. I've never been at a presentation where the speaker was too loud, but I've often been at presentations where the speaker was too quiet. The early feedback I got when I did academic presentations or worked as a coach in a sporting setting was to speak more loudly. Coaching children forced me to raise my voice so as to keep control of a group and get their attention quickly. When you speak a little too quietly, a few things can happen. People can't hear what you say, obviously. or people strain to listen, but after a while they just disengage. And also, sometimes people are just not convinced or persuaded. It's important to project an air of confident professionalism. Speaking up suggests you believe in what you're saying and that you care about communicating this message to other people. It's important, when you're trying to be persuasive, and it does not require you to be a big mouth. Very shy people can make very persuasive speakers. A good way of ensuring you are speaking loudly enough is to pitch your volume to speak to the person at the very back of the room. In one of my early experiences of presenting, someone at the back of the room shouted, "Can you speak up?" I was a bit ruffled at the time, but I said sure, and I raised my voice appropriately. Little did that person know they were actually doing me a big favor, even though they were being quite cheeky at the time. Also, some people are naturally animated. Others are more understated both physically and vocally. I certainly fall into the category of people who are not so animated, but it's important to inject some life into a presentation, and this can be hard if you're a bit more monotone or introverted. So try to talk about your topic as though you're enthusiastic, even when you don't feel that way. Sometimes you have to pretend to be excited or enthusiastic in order to engage your audience. Sounding more animated can sometimes be as simple as putting more emphasis on the key points you're trying to make. A good way of developing this is to listen to audio recordings and watch video of yourself practicing. That way you start to experience your own presenting style the same way as an audience member does. Now, I know watching footage of yourself can be uncomfortable, but it can also give you valuable insights into what aspects of your style works well and what needs to be improved. Listening to yourself presenting also helps you to understand if your timing of delivery is appropriate. When we're nervous, there's a tendency to rush. This makes it difficult for anyone listening to absorb the points we're making. A good way to regulate the pace is to think about breathing normally. Make sure you give yourself a chance to breathe. This helps to slow you down because you have to take short pauses between and during sentences. A pause can also show composure. If you forget what you were about to say or have a blank, take your time before moving on. Experienced speakers are comfortable taking a moment to allow a point to sink in or to formulate the next point they're going to make. So point 4 is practice. When we're nervous about a presentation, it can be tempting to avoid practice altogether because even when you think about it, it feels scary. So sometimes we put off preparation until the last minute. There's a number of benefits to practicing. Firstly, you'll be able to stick to the time when the real presentation rolls around. The practice runs will tell you if you are over or under time. Secondly, you'll be used to hearing your voice present the content and the process won't feel so strange and unfamiliar. Third, you will get a chance to assess your own presenting habits and make changes to your vocal and body language. And also, if you have a couple of friends or colleagues at your practices, you have the benefit of interacting with an audience and getting feedback afterwards. There is a reason that theatre groups have dress rehearsals and athletes practice in match-like conditions. There is no substitute for practicing in conditions that replicate the real performance. This can help you to feel some of the nerves you are likely to feel when doing your real presentation, and when the event rolls around, you'll have memories of successfully executing it. You'll also have confidence in knowing that you prepared as best you could. This can be very consoling when you're feeling super nervous. In the video that I will link below this video, Johnny Wilkinson talks a bit about creating stress in practice. It's very important. Repetition of your presentation is required to be really familiar with the content you need to deliver. So get extra practice in the shower, the car, or anywhere you like. Whilst notes can be a useful aid, it's best to know what you want to say by heart, and practice takes care of this. Okay, fifth and last tool, how to deal with nerves. There's a few important things I think you could consider here. The first one is Think about reframing the nervous symptoms, like the cold sweat, the shortness of breath, the dry mouth, sick tummy, jelly legs, wet palms. Your body is responding to stress because some threat is perceived. Performers and athletes are very familiar with these signs of nerves. In fact, you often hear veteran sports people saying that the day they don't feel nervous is the day they will retire. Why? Because this nervous energy has an important role. Typically, we get nervous in preparation for battle or for performance or for a significant life event. We get nervous for a presentation because we care about how it goes. So if we welcome the dry mouth and butterflies as signs that we are getting ready for something important, we can now harness that nervous energy. Michael Jordan is quoted as saying, "Being nervous isn't bad, it just means something important is happening." So that's the first tip, reframing. Secondly then, we tend to believe others can read our internal states better than they actually can, and this is known as the illusion of transparency. So for example, we think the audience is aware of our nerves when in fact they may not be. One study in 2003 actually suggested that just knowing about the illusion of transparency can improve a speaker's performance, as judged by both the speaker and their audience. So point 3 then relates to visualization. This is a term used for imagining a particular experience, but can be limiting because it seems to only refer to the visual sense. Imagery is an alternative term that also refers to multi-sensory imagining. According to Monroe, Chandler, and Guerrero, a golfer might see a ball, feel the swing, hear surrounding noise, and taste the sweat on her lip. She can have this multi-sensory imagery while sitting with her eyes closed. Imagery can be utilized by a trainee surgeon, an actor, a sports person, or anyone for that matter, in order to enhance performance. It can also help us to imagine things that might arise during a performance, like, for example, the projector doesn't work, or someone comes in loudly and late during an important point. Or, where a lot of us are doing presentations via Zoom or some other kind of online facility at the moment. And it could be that you have technical issues. So we can mentally prepare for these scenarios. Thinking about potential complications can help us to prepare better for unexpected problems and solve them with a cool head. Okay, so fourth, those of us who are less inclined to put ourselves in the spotlight can feel very self-conscious when presenting to a group. The feeling that all eyes are on us and that the audience hangs on our every word can be quite unpleasant, but we actually tend to overestimate how much others take note of our actions and appearance, and this is known as the spotlight effect. So no matter how strong of an impression you think you made on a group, either in the positive or negative sense, there's a good chance you're overestimating. This should be some comfort when facing into a presentation. Concentrating on your breath also, as I've mentioned before, can be really effective. And breathing deeply in the moments before your presentation can help to calm you. Some of you might be familiar with breathing exercises, but a very simple one is to breathe in through your nose for a count of 4, hold for a count of 2, and then breathe out through your mouth for a count of 4. And if you repeat that several times, even that can be quite effective in calming you down. Some final tips then. Anytime I set a presentation assignment for students, I know the likelihood is that 1 or 2 of them will avoid doing the presentation and they'll actually forego the marks. Firstly, I would recommend embracing the challenge. A challenge can be viewed as a threat or an opportunity, and embracing it as an opportunity leaves room for personal growth. The marks obtained for an assignment are usually forgotten, but the experience can be powerful. Secondly, I would say prepare conscientiously. The experience of presenting is worth much more than the marks that might go with it. It should be treated as a professional endeavour, and it's a great opportunity for self-development. Thirdly, remember that over time you will find your own style. By watching and listening to great orators and putting yourself out there to speak in front of others, you can create your own preparation methods and develop a personal style. And like many other aspects of life, there is room to improve always, no matter how experienced you become over time.